Cassius saw an orc woman being swallowed by the fury of the Tescan River. Using a short saddle rope, the ex-soldier yanked her from death. The next day, 50 orc warriors surrounded his ranch to claim her fate. What began as a rescue became the birth of a family that would defy the laws of the frontier. 2 months before that morning of iron and silence. We need to go back. The Tescan River didn't care about treaties. Cassius stood at its edge, the way he stood everywhere. Still watching, calculating. 8 years had passed since the war's last cannon fired at the northern marches. 8 harvests, 8 winters. And still, every morning, his hands remembered how to reach for something that wasn't there anymore. He was 41 years old. His ranch sat 3 miles east of the river, in a strip of land that no one wanted after the armistice, too close to orc territory, too far from the village. That was exactly why he'd chosen it. The land didn't ask questions. He drove a fence post into the frozen ground with a single heavy swing, then stopped, listened. The river was calm that morning, running low after a dry summer. A crow landed on the post beside him and stared with one yellow eye. Cassius stared back. Neither moved for a long moment. 8 years, he thought. 8 years of silence, and the frontier still felt like a held breath. He'd been a sergeant in the Northern Marches infantry, the kind of soldier who survived by noticing things others ignored. The way a shadow moved wrong, the way quiet could be a warning. He'd carried those instincts home like old wounds, and they hadn't faded. If anything, they'd sharpened in the solitude. His ranch was modest. A main cabin, a barn, a carpentry shed, a corral with 3 horses and a mule. He grew wheat, kept a few cattle, sold timber to the village twice a season. Enough. More than enough for one man who didn't sleep well and preferred the company of animals. He didn't hate orcs. That was the thing that made him strange to the village men, to people like Cyprian, who collected taxes and old grudges with equal enthusiasm. Cassius had fought beside orc units twice during the border campaigns. He'd watched them die. He'd watched them carry their dead with more ceremony than any human regiment he'd ever served in. He didn't hate them. He didn't particularly trust them either. He just didn't have the energy for hate anymore. The crow flew off. Cassius drove another post into the ground. 40 miles west, in the heart of Thornwood Forest, a woman was preparing to leave before dawn. Merga of the Bloodstone clan moved through her small dwelling with the efficiency of someone who had learned not to linger. The hut smelled of dried herbs and cold ash. The fire had been out for 2 days. She didn't bother relighting it. Her husband, Vokar, had been dead 18 months. He'd been a respected clan chief, killed in a skirmish at the Iron Frontier, a stupid, small conflict that the treaty was supposed to have ended. The clan had mourned him properly. They had sung his name for 3 nights, and then, as clans do, they had moved on. Merga hadn't. She pulled her travel cloak around her shoulders and picked up the saddlebag. Inside, 2 silver coins, a knife, a bundle of smoked meat, and a folded document. The deed to the horse she was bringing to sell. She'd been riding her own horse and leading Vokar's animal behind her on a rope since before sunrise. The eastern market was a half-day's ride. She would sell Vokar's horse, close that account, and be back in Thornwood by nightfall. She stepped outside into the pre-dawn dark. Her horse waited at the post, and behind him on a short lead rope stood Vokar's animal, steady, patient, unaware it was walking to its last owner. She mounted, gathered both reins, and rode east toward the Tescan crossing. The bayou near the willow grove was calm that morning. She crossed without incident, the water barely reaching the horse's knees. She didn't look back. The storm came without warning. Cassius saw it first as a bruise on the horizon above the iron peaks, that particular shade of purple that meant run, not walk. He'd been checking the cattle in the northern pasture when the wind shifted. In 30 seconds, the air went from still to hostile. He drove the cattle toward the barn at a jog, whistling sharply. His stallion, Drum, was already nervous at the fence, ears flat. Bad one coming. The first crack of thunder split the sky before he got the barn doors closed. Rain followed, not a gentle rain, but a wall of it, cold and violent, turning the yard to dark mud in minutes. He latched the barn, ran to the cabin, and stood at the window watching the river. The Tescan was rising. He could see it from the hill behind his property, the water turning from amber to black, from a steady hum to a low roar. Debris appeared, branches, a broken fence post, something that might have been a market crate. The river was pulling everything in the valley into itself. At the eastern market, the sale had gone cleanly. Merga stood at the edge of the fairground as the new owner led Vokar's horse away. She watched until the animal disappeared between the stalls. She felt nothing dramatic, just a quiet closing, like a door gently shut in an empty room. She tucked the silver coins into her saddlebag and mounted her own horse. Time to go home. She didn't notice the sky changing until she was already on the road. By the time she reached the valley that led to the Tescan crossing, the storm had turned the world grey and violent. Rain hammered down in sheets. The road ahead was a river of mud. She pushed her horse faster, hoping to cross before the water climbed too high. She knew this crossing. She'd used it her whole life, but when she reached the willow grove, the vore was gone. The calm ford she'd crossed that morning had been swallowed under 3 feet of churning brown water that moved like something alive and furious. Her horse stamped and snorted, whites showing in his eyes. She looked back. The road behind her was flooding too, the valley acting as a bowl filling from both ends. There was no turning back. She urged her horse forward. He found footing on the submerged stones for 4 strides, 5, and then the bottom disappeared. He lurched sideways. Merga grabbed the mane, tried to throw her weight right. The current hit them like a wall. The horse screamed and spun. She felt the saddle slide, grabbed for anything, and then she was in the water, cold, black, roaring. A submerged log slammed into her left leg with a force that turned her vision white. She surfaced, gasping, and saw the bank already 30 feet away and moving. The horse was fighting the current too, but he was stronger, 4 legs against the water, angling hard toward the far bank. She saw him find shallow ground and haul himself out, shaking and blowing. Safe. She was not. The Tescan took her downstream like she weighed nothing. The rope was too short. That was Cassius's first thought as he scrambled down the bank, rocks sliding under his boots, rain blinding him. The saddle rope was 6 feet of hemp, good for tying hay bales, useless for a river rescue. But it was what he had. He couldn't outrun the current, so he had to outthink it. He'd studied this river for 8 years. He knew where it bent. He knew where the deep channel ran close to the eastern bank, squeezed by the rock shelf 50 yards downstream. If she was still fighting, if she hadn't gone under, the current would push her there. He cut across the hillside at a diagonal, vaulting a fallen log, sliding the last 10 feet down a muddy slope. He hit the flat rock shelf running. The river roared to his left. Rain hammered his face. He could barely see, but he could see her. She was 10 yards out, fighting sideways, trying to angle toward the bank. Her jaw was set, not panicking, working. She was treating the river like an enemy to be outmaneuvered, not a force to fight head-on. Even in that moment, something in Cassius registered it. She's trained. He planted his boots in a crack in the rock shelf, wrapped the rope once around his left forearm, and through the loop, Merga saw the rope. She almost didn't grab it. For a half second, her mind registered human, shore, rope, and underneath that, a flicker of the old training. Don't accept help from strangers on the frontier. Too many ambushes started that way. Then the current spun her sideways, and she saw the rocks ahead. She grabbed the loop. The jolt was violent. The rope snapped taut, and something cracked in her shoulder. Not broken, but wrong. And then she was being dragged sideways against the current, her body slamming into the soft mud of the bank. She dug her fingers in, pulled. The human on the other end was pulling too, rope cutting into his forearm, boots grinding against the rock. She got a hand on a root, then both hands. Then she was on the bank, face down in the mud, coughing river water while the rain pounded her back. The rope went slack. She heard him breathing hard above her. Cassius looked at the woman he'd just pulled from the water. She was tall, even prone. He could tell she'd stand at least 2 inches over him standing. Green skin, paler at the throat and jaw. The tusks were barely visible, more suggestion than protrusion. Her hair was black, plastered flat against a strong-boned face. She held her left leg at a careful angle. Something had happened to it in the water. She was alive. He crouched down. "Can you stand?" She raised her head and looked at him with eyes the color of copper pennies, and said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, yes. She couldn't. He didn't say anything about it. He just put his shoulder under her arm and helped her up, and they walked through the rain toward his barn. 50 miles north, in the main camp of the Bloodstone clan, a warrior named Drogon was cleaning his axe. He didn't know yet. None of them did. But Murga's horse had come back riderless through the forest. It had crossed at a shallower point upstream and found its way back to familiar ground. By the time the storm broke, someone would count the animals in the corral and find the space where hers should have been. The search would begin by morning. The barn was warm. Cassius had a brazier in the corner for cold nights when the animals needed watching. He lit it now, shook out a blanket from the chest by the wall, and handed it to her without ceremony. Merga took it, wrapped it around her shoulders, sat down heavily on a hay bale. He knelt and looked at her leg. The left one was the problem. She'd taken a hit from something in the river, a submerged log. From the bruising pattern, a long, straight mark across the shin and calf. The ankle was swelling fast, already purple beneath the skin. Not broken, but it would be useless for days. He brought a bucket of cold water from the pump, tore a strip from a clean rag, and began wrapping it tight. She watched him work. There was something unsettling about being watched by an orc who wasn't afraid of you and wasn't threatening you. Cassius had experienced it exactly twice before, once with a clan elder who'd negotiated a prisoner exchange at the marches, and once with a young orc warrior who'd shared a fire with his unit during a 3-day truce. Both times, the attention had felt like being weighed on a scale he couldn't see. He focused on the ankle. "You were going back to Thornwood," he said. "Not a question." "Yes." "From the Eastern Market." A pause. "You tracked the road." "Saw the direction you came from." He tied off the wrap. "The Vor's gone. Won't be passable for 2-3 days. Silence, rain against the roof. One of his horses shifted in the stall. He went to the cabin and came back with a tin mug of broth. The pot he kept on the low fire all day, just salt and dried onion and bone marrow. Basic. He offered it without a word. She took it, drank, said nothing. That was fine." He sat on the floor against the opposite wall and let the quiet do what quiet did. After a while she said, "I'm Merga." "Cassius." Another silence, comfortable somehow. "You didn't ask for my clan name," she said. "Didn't need it." She looked at him for a moment, measuring him the way people measure distances, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. Then she said, "My horse. He made it to the far bank. I saw him get out near the willow grove." "He'll stay close to the water," said Cassius. "Horses don't wander far from where they got scared." He paused. "When your leg is better, I'll go with you to find him." Merga was quiet for a moment. Then, "You'd do that?" "I said it, didn't I?" She looked back at the brazier. The fire crackled. Outside, the rain had almost stopped. The river still roared in the distance, but lower now, already beginning to settle. "Thank you," she said, quiet, direct, no ceremony. He nodded once. "Get some sleep." 50 miles north, Drogon had already assembled 10 scouts. Merga's horse had returned riderless, crossing at a shallow upstream point before finding its way back to familiar ground. Drogon had sent riders to check the VAU at the Willow Grove. 2 scouts came back inside the hour, grim-faced. The VAU was submerged, the banks were churned. There were tracks, A horse going in, a horse coming out alone on the far side and further downstream. 2 sets of prints in the mud, 1 orc, 1 human, leading east together. Human boots. Drogon stood very still for a moment. Then he turned to his lieutenant. "Send word to the general." She told him about Vokar just before midnight. Cassius hadn't asked. But the fire was low, and the rain had softened to a hiss, and sometimes silence gets heavy enough that words fall out of it. "He died at the Iron Frontier," she said, 18 months ago. A border dispute over 3 acres of grazing land. She looked at the mug in her hands. 3 acres. Cassius thought about the men he'd watched die at the northern marches. The reasons had never been better. "I know what useless deaths look like," and he said. She glanced at him. Something shifted in her face. Not softness exactly, but the slight loosening of something held very tight for a long time. "I've been moving through the motions," she said. "Selling things, closing accounts, making everything smaller." She paused. "Easier to disappear that way." "I know that too." The fire crackled. Outside, the rain had almost stopped. The river still roared. "You live alone," she said. 8 years. You chose it." "Yes." She nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something she'd already suspected. "The war made you strange." He almost smiled. The war made everyone strange. Some people just hide it better. She looked at him for a long moment, copper-penny eyes, quiet and sure. Then she said quietly, "Thank you. For the rope." He nodded once. "Get some sleep. I'll check the ankle in the morning." In the pre-dawn dark, 50 Bloodstone warriors moved through Thornwood in silence. General Hrock led them personally. He was not a man, not an orc, who left things to scouts when the matter involved a widow of noble lineage. Merga was Bloodstone by blood and by marriage, and if a human had harmed her, or taken her, or used the storm as cover for something darker, the tracks were clear. 2 figures, 1 limping. "The ranch," said Drogon, pointing east. "Human settlement 3 miles past the river." Hrock looked at the horizon. Dawn was an hour away. "We move." Cassius heard them before he saw them. He'd been awake since first light, old soldier's habit. He was at the fence checking the overnight storm damage when he heard it, the particular silence that precedes organized movement. Not wind, not animals, men, many of them moving with discipline. He turned slowly. They were already on the hills. 50 warriors in full battle arrangement, iron-black lances catching the pale morning light. Green faces, hard eyes, the Bloodstone clan markings in dark red across their arms. At the center, a figure twice as broad as the others. Hrock, the general, unmistakable even at 200 yards. Cassius did not reach for anything. He stood at the fence and waited. Hrock descended alone. He stopped 10 feet away and looked at Cassius with the careful, measuring look of a man deciding whether to kill now or after he gets his answer. "There is a woman of our clan," said Hrock. "She was last seen going to the eastern market. Her horse returned without her. Her tracks lead here." He paused. "Where is she?" "In my barn," said Cassius. "Asleep. Her ankle is wrapped. She drank broth last night and slept on dry hay." Hrock's expression didn't change. "You will bring her out. She'll come out when she wakes up. I'm not going to drag an injured woman out of a warm barn to prove a point." A sound moved through the warriors on the hill, like wind through dry grass. 50 hands tightened on 50 weapons. Cassius didn't move. Inside the barn, Merga was already awake. She'd heard the movement too. Old instincts. She was standing at the crack in the door, weight on her good leg, looking out at the phalanx of Bloodstone warriors and the rigid back of the human who'd saved her life, standing between her and 50 armed men without a weapon in his hands. She felt something she hadn't expected. She pushed the door open. "Stand down." Merga's voice carried the way voices do when they've commanded rooms before. Not a shout, just certainty. She crossed the yard slowly, favouring her left leg, the improvised walking staff in her right hand. Every warrior on the hill went still. Hrok turned. He looked at her, at the wrapped ankle, the dry cloak, the steady eyes, and the killing tension in his jaw fractured just slightly. "Merga, you're alive. Because of him." She stopped beside Cassius. "The Tescan took me in the storm. A log hit my leg and the current carried me. He pulled me out with a saddle rope." She looked at Hrok directly. "I will remain here until my leg heals enough to ride, and until I've retrieved my horse from the far bank near the willow grove. Cassius promised to ride with me tomorrow to find the animal. The clan will wait." Her tone was quiet and absolute. "He showed more honor in 5 minutes than I've seen in some warriors in 5 years. I won't dishonor that by leaving before the debt is settled." Hrok looked at Cassius for a long moment. Cassius looked back with the same flat patience he'd used at the fence. Two men who had both learned when not to speak. Finally, Hrok hit his fist against his chest, once, a sound like a door closing. The warriors on the hill echoed it, 50 fists against 50 breastplates. They turned and walked back into Thornwood. The sound faded. The birds returned. Cassius let out a breath. "You could have warned me," he said. "You didn't seem to need it," said Merga. 3 miles away, in the village of Keld's Crossing, a man named Cyprian was watching the smoke rise from the direction of the Tescan ranch. He stood at his window with a cup of cold tea and a warm sense of opportunity. He'd heard the rumors, the bloodstone warriors moving through the forest road, the storm, the orc woman. A human keeping an orc woman in his barn. Cyprian smiled. He had a document he'd been meaning to file for months, and now he had a reason. The next morning, as promised, Cassius saddled Drum before sunrise. Merga was already at the corral gate, leaning on her staff, her jaw set with the patience of someone who had learned to manage pain without advertising it. Her leg was still swollen, but she could bear weight on it now, barely enough to mount, but enough. They rode in silence along the river road, following the eastern bank south, toward the willow grove. The storm had left the valley washed and strange. Fallen branches across the path, deep grooves cut into the mud by the flood, the river still running higher than normal, but quiet now, almost apologetic. Cassius watched the far bank as they rode. She watched it too. They found the horse 2 miles downstream, in a shallow green vale where the river curved away from the road. He was grazing calmly in the morning light, reins trailing in the grass, as if the entire storm had been a mild inconvenience he'd already forgotten. Merga crossed the ford on Drum behind Cassius, slid down at the bank, and walked to the animal. She pressed her face against his neck and said something low in Orcish, a few words, quiet and private. Cassius stayed back and let her have the moment. She laughed, a short, startled sound, almost surprised out of her. He thought it was possibly the best thing he'd heard in 8 years. They brought the horse back to the ranch, and Merga stayed. She didn't announce it. She simply looked at the fence with 3 sections down and the carpentry shed missing 2 roof beams, and she started carrying timber. She could move in an hour, what would take him the better part of a day. She didn't ask permission. The work organized itself around them the way water finds a downhill path. He'd hand her a beam and she'd set it, she'd hold a post and he'd drive it. The days passed. On the 4th evening he left her the better half of the stew. She noticed. On the 6th morning she came back from the forest's edge with a bundle of grey leaf and dark root, pressed it into his palm without preamble. "For your back, you favor your right side when you carry heavy loads." He made the poultice that night. By morning, the ache that had lived in his lower back for 3 years was quiet. On the 12th day, Cyprian rode through the gate. He came with 2 hired men, thick-necked, bored-looking, the kind who worked for whoever paid on time. He had a leather satchel under his arm, and the careful smile of a man holding cards he was sure were better than yours. Cassius was at the corral. Merga was behind him, setting a fence post. She stopped when she heard the horses. Cyprian looked at her, the way people look at things they've decided are problems. "Cassius," he said pleasantly. "I've had complaints." "From who?" "Concerned citizens." He opened the satchel. "There's the matter of a foreign occupation tax, use of agricultural land by a non-citizen party, and a conduct fee for maintaining relations with a designated foreign national." He held out the documents with the flourish of a man very pleased with himself. "The amounts are listed. I can accept coin or deed." Cassius looked at the papers. He looked at Cyprian. He looked at the two hired men, who were trying to look dangerous and mostly looked tired. "These aren't real," said Cassius. "They're filed and stamped by the... I know every tax code in the Kell district. I paid them for 8 years. Cassius stepped closer. "These aren't real. You made them up because a woman is helping me fix my fence, and you don't like what she looks like." Cyprian's pleasant expression curdled at the edges. "The law. Get off my land." Cyprian left, but the smile didn't quite disappear. It just folded itself away, patient, waiting. He came back 4 days later with 3 hired men and a confiscation notice, a single sheet with an official-looking seal that Cassius could see, even at 10 feet, was stamped crooked. "Traitors' conduct, foreign collaboration, land reverted to district authority." Cassius read it once, folded it, put it in his coat pocket. Then he went inside. Merga watched from the fence. She had heard everything. She understood what was happening. She'd seen it before, in other forms, on the orc side of the frontier, men who couldn't win wars finding smaller battles to feel powerful. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest. This is my fault. I should leave. But she didn't move, because she'd also watched Cassius for 12 days. She knew what kind of man he was. She wanted to see what he'd do now. The cabin door opened. Cassius walked out carrying a long-barreled pistol, heavy iron, the kind issued to officers of the Northern Marches infantry. He held it at his side, not raised, not threatening, just present. He walked to Cyprian and stopped. The hired men saw his posture and went very still. They recognized it the way animals recognize a predator, not by threat, but by certainty. This was a man who had made this exact walk before, toward worse things than a crooked tax collector, and had come back from all of them. Cassius pressed the barrel gently against Cyprian's chest. 8 years, he said. I spent 8 years trying to forget how to do this. His voice was quiet, even. The war ended. I came here. I built something. And you came onto my land with fake papers because a woman helped me fix my fence. Cyprian had gone the color of old milk. The treaty was supposed to mean something, Cassius continued. It didn't fix what people carried in their hearts, but it meant the law couldn't be used as a weapon anymore. He removed the barrel. This isn't a warning. This is a promise. If you come back here, with papers, with men, with anything, I will remember that I was a soldier before I was a farmer. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Cyprian turned his horse and rode. The hired men followed without a word. Merga crossed the yard. She stopped beside him. He was still looking at the gate, breathing slow and steady. She could see his hand, the one that had held the pistol, trembling slightly. Not fear, the aftermath of controlled anger, the kind that cost something. She put her hand on his shoulder, large, warm, steady. "You didn't have to do that," she said. He looked at her. "Yes, I did." She held his gaze, copper-penny eyes, quiet and sure. Then she said simply, "I'm glad it was you." He put the pistol away. Months passed, then a year, then more. The Bloodstone warriors came once more, 4 of them sent by the clan to bring Merga home. She met them in the yard with her arms crossed and her chin up, and said 3 sentences that ended the conversation. They beat their fists against their chests and left before sundown. Cassius watched from the barn door. He didn't interfere. It wasn't his fight. But when she walked back across the yard toward him, she was smiling, small, private, certain. And he thought, This is what peace actually looks like. Not the paper, not the treaty. This. A year after that, a child's voice filled the ranch for the first time. The boy arrived at dawn, because, of course he did, as if he'd decided to begin the way his father always had, watching the light come up over the iron peaks. He was healthy and loud, and entirely sure of his own importance from the first moment. Cassius held him in the barn while Merga rested, the brazier warm, the horses quiet in their stalls. The boy had his eyes, pale and watchful, and his mother's jaw, strong and certain, and on his right forearm, a small wash of green, like river moss, like thornwood in spring. He was a bridge, not a symbol, not a statement, just a small, furious, living bridge between two worlds that had spent centuries burning everything they'd built between them. He sat in the hay and held his son and listened to the Tescan run. 2 years on, Merga stood at the corral fence in afternoon light. The boy was 2 years old and sitting in the saddle in front of Cassius, gripping the reins with both hands like he was born to it, shrieking with laughter every time the horse took a step. Cassius moved with him, one hand steadying the boy's back, guiding Drum in a slow circle, while the afternoon poured gold over everything. Merga watched. The grief was gone, not erased. It had simply found its proper place, folded carefully and set aside, the way you keep something you want to remember without being crushed by it. Vokar had been real, her loss had been real, and now this was real too. The man and the child in the dusty corral, the horses drowsy in the heat, the Tescan running silver in the distance. She'd been pulled from that river by a 6-foot rope. She thought about that sometimes. How close it had been. How easily the whole thread of this life could have snapped, and she would never have known what it was unraveling toward. She pushed off the fence and walked across the yard. Cassius saw her coming and pulled Drum to a stop. The boy turned at the sound of her footsteps and reached both arms out, grabbing at the air. She lifted him from the saddle. He pressed his face against her neck, already half asleep, the way children collapse without warning into trust. Cassius dismounted. He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching, the three of them in the middle of that dusty yard at the edge of the frontier where the map ran out and the world began. The Tescan ran on. It didn't care about treaties. But today, for once, that felt like a good thing, because neither did they. In the region of the Tescan, they would tell the story for a long time. The man with the short rope. The widow who stopped 50 warriors with 3 sentences. The child with the green arm who laughed at horses. People told it the way people tell stories that cost them something to believe. Carefully, in low voices, in places where the wrong ears wouldn't hear. Not because it was dangerous, because it was true. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orc-Bound Legacy.